Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, September 19th, 2022. Time for another show. It is, as I warned, and I dreaded the arrival of Talk Like a Pirate Day. I don't know. I don't feel like talking like a pirate today. So we could do it, and we had a pretty good joke all set and everything. I don't know. Maybe the spirit will move me. Greg might help in getting us involved and interested again. But the pretty good joke from last week, of course, was that we might try to treat this as Talk Like a Pirate from Boston Day and take all the R's out of the only thing you get to say as a pirate and walk around all day just saying, and, well, it's just not that exciting, actually. Anyway, so could we do the entire show in heavy Boston accent? I don't know. I don't know if we could sustain that all the way. First of all, we'd be stuck in the right in the beginning saying, I guess, what would we say? Kagro in the morning show? I don't know if I can sustain that all the time. Morning. Good morning, everybody. I can try it with Greg anyway. I don't know. Just not feeling all that piratical today. Although, as it turns out, perhaps, maybe the news will bring us there as, the kidnapping of migrants is still in the news, of course, over the weekend. It feels like the awful was piling up again. I guess we're getting around to election season, and the heart of the campaign, everybody's stepping up and hyping things up, and so the awfulness that is Trump and that is now becoming Ron DeSantis, Greg Abbott, and the rest who think, I guess, that they will contend for the presidency either in 2024 or next time, depending on whether or not Trump decides he's going to, dump all over him and run again and maybe ruin things for the Republican Party, possibly forever. I don't know. But I don't know. Feels like that sort of vibe again. And just catching up with all the other things. It is, of course, yes, right, the Queen's actual funeral finally is today. I think we're finally done with this, as it turns out, 12-day mourning period. I was discussing this over the weekend, too, as I was watching people in the UK becoming restless under the strictures of this mourning period. And apparently that's a traditional thing. Is it a 12-day mourning period for, I don't know, who's got any idea? It hasn't happened in our lifetime. And that's one of the issues. It's kind of, they haven't dealt with modernity much in terms of how they, pay their respects to a deceased monarch. The last time it happened, for all of the things that they're doing now, and people finding themselves surprised that, television shows are canceled, that they aren't playing their soccer games, and that's huge in England, and they're closing parks. There was a sign up being sent around on Twitter yesterday that people couldn't even go bird watching in the parks. They fenced off the parks, and if you're trying to watch birds from the fence line, they'll remove you. That's pretty, that's going to turn people into anti-monarchists at some point. But I guess if it hasn't happened yet, then it won't, because today's the last day. And they all get to go home and watch the show today. But, wow, I mean, they didn't really have much in the way of TV, and, I don't know what this soccer league was really like, or whether everybody really, I don't know, in the 1950s, early 50s, right, was the last time that they had to go through this. And so there was a lot less of the modern world to have to shut down. And I think it's a larger inconvenience. And, of course, I don't know that the monarchy has grown any more popular since then. And, of course, multicultural England, some of whom probably don't care a great deal about the monarchy, but some who have made it a point to assimilate and adopt even those behaviors. So who knows? I got no advice for you on how to deal with your monarchy. Just, I'm sure, I feel for you, but it's one more day and then you're back to your regular nonsense and we won't understand you and you'll be driving on the wrong side of the road and everything. So, whatever. Condolences to those who are watching the funeral, and condolences to those who are just waiting for it all to be over. It is almost over. And you get to move on to the ridiculous phase of politics like we've been in the last 12 days, piratical or not. More detail about the kidnapping and removal of migrants from Texas to Florida for just a second so that they could pretend to be deported from Florida and sent on to Martha's Vineyard. All the details, I think we're out by Friday. We might even have had them in our hands for Friday morning during the show. That apparently people were deceived as to why they were boarding. Florida officials, of course, dispute that, but who cares, because those people weren't in Florida in the first place. The fact that you're pretending they were, or that you're somehow responsible for it, that it was up to you what to do with the people who were arriving in Texas, seems pretty ridiculous, but he seems to be clinging to it, DeSantis, and insisting, no, it was all voluntary, and they all knew exactly where they were going, except they really didn't, and now they're saying so. And anyway, trying to figure this out and whether or not it really could in fact constitute some sort of criminal violation on several fronts, not just the use of diverted federal funds to do this thing, but of course, telling people that they were going to Boston and they were going to have work papers waiting for them and shelter waiting for them, and none of that is true. And seemed like a setup from the beginning, as the New York Post, I believe it was, went with the headline of that the rich liberal hypocrites in Martha's Vineyard deported these migrants just as quickly as anybody else, in that they arrived on the island. Islanders came out, provided them with food, shelter, clothing, emergency services, etc., and even arranged to get them to where they thought they were going in the first place, probably Boston, where the jobs are, as opposed to the now seasonally closed Martha's Vineyard. Had they arrived during the height of the season, they probably would have been employed immediately in all the bustling industry that goes on there during the summer, but the jobs are seasonal and the jobs are elsewhere, so that having moved them to the jobs and the availability of services, the New York Post story was, well, they packed them up into a ferry right away and shipped them out because they're hypocrites. And, that's the storyline that they were looking for from the beginning. And they were hoping for, you hypocritical liberals who say you're sanctuary cities will send you the migrants that you say you want and we don't. But like hypocrites, you won't help them, you won't serve them, you won't welcome them at all. Oh, not true. Just tell us when and where. We'll meet them with counselors and services and places that we can bring them for shelter and food and assimilation into their new surroundings. And they just answer that with, no, hypocrites. There's nothing that can be done. They're not, obviously, just like everything else, they can't be reasoned with. And this is the same thing as they do with everything else. It's another of the big lies. They just yell hypocrite loudly, so loudly that you can't actually follow the story and figure out what is it that people are doing when people arrive on their doorstep. The buses continue to drop them off in Washington, D.C. and in New York. I understand a story over the weekend detailing that the people who drive the buses from Texas are under contractual obligation. They don't get paid if they communicate in any way with authorities in New York when they're dropping people off. So they just simply, the cruelty as the point, we know about that, but the cruelty is also written into the contract, which is a fairly amazing thing. And I don't know, it just keeps getting worse. Let me let Greg in the get a word in edgewise door so that we can start discussing it in proper terms. Good morning, Greg. How are you? How are you? Or how are you, depending on
good morning. Well, a lot to talk about, and we'll certainly get to the situation on Martha's Vineyard, which has historical context. And, we'll talk about the reverse freedom riders. We'll also, a little foreshadowing here, talk about Stacey Abrams' reception in Forsyth County in Georgia as she crossed their borders, with echoes of what's going on in Martha's Vineyard. But, of course, we have to start with the somber pomp and ceremony and historic the burden of history that feels like it falls on you because, of course, everybody is turning today to the fact that it's International Talk Like a Pirate Day.
Yes. Yar.
Which is September 19th. It's the 20-year history. This is the 20th anniversary.
That's right.
And if you want, of course,
Queen.
there's things you could do. You can go to YouTube and turn on the bilge pumps and listen to Shiver My Timbers or Daily Costa's own Tom Smith, Filker Tom, Talk Like a Pirate. There's lots of songs about it, sea shanties, as it were.
Yes.
But we do have to acknowledge that. And I do want to say there are some actual real pirates. St. Augustine Pirate and Treasure Museum, for example, has a nice online tour that you can go and look at. And, there's everything there from Sir Francis Drake, which, the first Elizabeth's own pirate, actually a privateer, who came 2,000 strong and burned the 400-person city of St. Augustine.
Oh.
So there's lots of pirate history if that's your thing. Oh, by the way, there's also a funeral today. I don't know if you noticed.
I have.
If you turn on the TV, you might notice.
Yes, right. I have not done that yet, but later on I'll see people marching in uniforms, some of which are very unusual looking.
Right. Much of the funeral for Elizabeth II started some years ago. In fact, the planning started with Queen Victoria, the 1901 funeral, and built on that. And, of course, they've been exercising and practicing it for 70 years now.
Yeah, well.
So, and they got it right, and I turned on the TV just to see what was going on, and exactly Eastern Time, 7 o'clock, is when they started singing God Save the Queen. I mean, it was just precisely when they were supposed to.
Greenwich
so I
Mean
presume
Time
that's the only part of it I saw, and I presume the rest of it will go on. I really don't care what kind of necklace the Princess of Wales is wearing, and I really don't care much about it. But, the pomp and ceremony helps them, good for them. And since it's been like 10 days now, I think after today we don't have to watch every second of it.
Yeah, well, we were never required to.
I'm a colonist, what can I tell you?
Yeah. I'm glad they're getting the big show and that everybody gets all their services back. I guess starting tomorrow or maybe...
The Brits I know are comforted by it. That's the purpose of pageant ritual, and so good.
Yeah. If they're liking it, then great. Yeah, the ones who are complaining about it, I feel sorry for you.
The one thing I will say is Queen Elizabeth was a groundbreaker, and the fact that, I go back to her teenage history and, getting on the radio and talking to the children during the Blitz and enlisting in the service and becoming a mechanic.
Yeah.
In an era where women didn't do stuff like that, good for her. So
yes. Very nice.
Speak only good of the dead.
Yes. Okay.
And if you're Ken Starr, if you're dead, good.
Good. Well, there's no 12-day mourning period for him.
Right. And so, I think this whole thing about what happened and what's happening with Martha's Vineyard is sort of important. Again, for context, you have to remember that Obama has a house on Martha's Vineyard. Mm-hmm. They're sending migrants, whether it's Abbott or whether it's DeSantis, competing to see who could be crueler, are sending humans, to Vice President Kamala Harris's house.
Yes, right. You're not allowed to.
So they're picking their places based on that. They're sending a lot to New York City because New York City can handle it. But part of the deal that people are getting upset at is not that liberals can't handle migrants. It's like, New York City has never seen anybody from another country before.
What? We don't know what to do.
We don't know what to do. No, it's that they deliberately chose not to tell them that they were coming. A simple heads up would allow services to be in place. And their performatory drama here is to try to set it up so that nobody knows. Of course, now that everybody knows they're coming, it doesn't quite work like that. But, it's part of the cruelty is the point. And they would love, the libs have to be owned. And the way to do that is to show them what's going on here. And, of course, what backfired for them, among other things, is the compassionate way that the Venezuelans were being handled in Martha's Vineyard. They were getting fed. People were stepping up. The fact that the vineyard is, 40% or so non-white, and the fact that, they do have people who can meet them, greet them, make them feel comfortable, all in a voluntary manner by actually telling them the truth as opposed to lying to where they were going to go, is the part of the story that they didn't want. The other parts that are coming out, yes, you mentioned the fact that they're spending money that it may not be clear that they're supposed to be spending.
Yeah.
But also the people who arranged the flights.
Yeah.
What companies are they? Who are they? How did it happen? How come all of a sudden they don't seem to exist? They've disappeared.
Yeah. That's an odd thing.
They were a front for whom?
To be able to fly
and how did it
like that.
work out that they were using Air Force bases and other things? And, what are the ties to CBP and ICE and other agencies that basically allowed this stuff to happen? Are these the same people that had the Customs and Border Patrol accounts on Twitter that had to be suspended because they were tweeting racist and anti-Semitic stuff?
I mean, seems likely.
There's a whole bigger story here
Yeah.
that probably is not the one that they want people to focus on. But let's just talk a little bit about what is happening. And, this you have to step back and look at it historically, because I say you do. I mean, you
okay.
really do, but I say you do, so you have to.
Sure. All right. Well, that's a reason.
So the best story I could find.
Let me step back on my peg leg.
The best. Don't step back on your peg leg, because if you don't know where it's going, you might get stuck in a hole.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a cry of pain. So
I could tell.
This is from February 2020.
Events.
And it is from NPR, and it's the best news story, media story I could find on this. And it's called The Cruel Story Behind the Reverse Freedom Rides.
Yes. Okay. We did hear about those.
And this happened nearly 60 years ago. And the place that they were being sent from Louisiana were black families enticed to go north to get a job, and they were being sent to Hyannis.
Yeah.
And they wanted the White Citizens Council in Louisiana, who was setting this up, wanted to send them without warning, without notice.
Of course.
By enticing them onto the buses, they wanted to send them to the Kennedy family.
Right.
In fact, they promised the people on the bus the Kennedy family would be waiting for her.
Yeah.
For them, for this particular person that they
seems
interviewed.
Unlikely in hindsight, but okay.
So this particular bus left Little Rock, Arkansas, pulled into Hyannis. I don't know if it got there from Louisiana or whether it left from Little Rock, Arkansas, because there were several people, several governors, several states that were doing this. And President Kennedy wasn't there, and there was no job, and there was no permanent housing. And so they were unwitting pawns in a segregationist game. And Margaret Mosley, who's a long-time civil rights activist in Hyannis, a few years before her death, said it was one of the most inhumane things I've ever seen. Fuming over the civil rights movement, Southern segregationists had concocted a way to retaliate against Northern liberals in 1962. They tricked about 200 African Americans from the South into moving north. Of course, the scale is much bigger now.
Yeah.
The idea was simple. When large numbers of African Americans showed up on northern doorsteps, Northerners would not be able to accommodate them. They wouldn't want them, and their hypocrisy would be exposed. You probably know that Ken Burns, how the U.S. handled the Holocaust with nobody wanting Jews to come here, was playing on the PBS stations last night.
Right.
And so there's echoes of that. But the reverse freedom rides have largely disappeared from the country's collective memory. The scheme almost never appears in history books. It's little known even in Hyannis, which was the primary target. There was a bus that was supposed to go to Minnesota and drop them off in Hubert Humphrey's backyard, but that one never got organized. And some hear echoes of the segregationist past in America's present for some reason. And for the families that came to the North based on a lie, the journeys cast an enduring shadow on their lives. So this all started because in the summer of '61, black and white activists, the Freedom Riders, boarded Greyhound buses and crisscrossed the South. And so this was response to them. For many years, certain politicians, educators, and certain religious leaders abused the white people of the South as whipping boy, to put it mildly, whipping boy.
Wrongly.
Whipping boy.
They're the ones doing the whipping.
For further their own ends and political campaigns, said Amos Guthridge, a lawyer from Arkansas who helped spearhead the reverse freedom rides. We're going to find out if people like Ted Kennedy, and the Kennedys, all of them, really do have an interest in the Negro people and really have a love for the Negro. The segregationists tapped into a network of local groups called citizens' councils. Despite the sanitized name, the councils were essentially the Ku Klux Klan without the hoods and masks, said historian Clive Webb. Clive Webb, who's English, University of Sussex in England, specializes in studying racists, and 15 years ago, he published the first and still the only major academic article on the reverse freedom riders. Which is pretty remarkable.
It is, although I guess you could say, well, look, this is the facts. Once you tell the story,
well, if he did the story well, you only do it once.
There you go.
If you have things that you disagree with, then there's hundreds of variations.
Well, there is nothing to disagree with, apparently. No one has had a word to say, so he got it right out of the box.
So the Citizens Councils attempted to cloak their racism in respectability, Webb said. And again, this is the only media report I can find that mentions him, that interviews him, or at least has what he said at the time.
Right now.
They held meetings in fancy downtown hotels and wore suits and ties. They could be members of the police force, said Webb. They could be bankers, businessmen, and the like. They masterminded an advertising effort with flyers and radio commercials to attract African Americans to accept bus tickets. They targeted people who were either welfare recipients or prison inmates, people who were placing a burden as they saw it on public resources. And they sought media attention. Here's where Louisiana comes in. I mentioned that, who claimed credit for the original idea was a fellow named George Singelmann, M-A-N-N, had once worked in a newsroom. He made sure to alert the press. Negro ride plan stirs new furor, read a front page headline in the New York Times. Boston Herald added 14 more jobless Negroes sent north. As spring rolled into summer and then fall, nearly daily articles chronicled the scheme as it unfolded. They relish the coverage. If it takes 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, 5 to 10 years, whatever. But the segregationists were not always so transparent. They offered ever-changing justifications for the scheme. Watch for that today, by the way.
Yes.
Ned Touchstone said his primary motivation was to bring about a more equitable distribution of the colored population. They were begging for assistance. Is it a crime to help people who come to you and say, boss man, I want to go to the north?
What
a quote.
My God. Yeah, by the way, there was an interesting motion there too, right? Like a more equitable distribution. Like we need to spread them out across the entirety of the country, as opposed to, the people who imported them as slaves, maybe that would be more equitable. But you know what? Better off. Come on.
Rationale. He said, forefathers put everything in their possession into covered wagons and went out across the plains. In these days, it was rugged Americanism, and now it's being frowned upon. I don't understand it.
Boy, well, yeah, I really do expect that kind of, that level of spin for sure will be involved in this. I mean, it already is. But just as we've seen, like the New York Post, the way they cover things, their spin, it's a different thing. Instead of trying to turn it into something good, turn it into something bad, but on the part of the Martha's Vineyarders. But yeah, it's pretty remarkable, and you will see them scrambling, and some of them will say it's the greatest thing ever, and then if you point out, well, it's horrifically racist and inhumane. No. They wanted, it was all voluntary. They came here they wanted to be in Boston, or they wanted to at least go where jobs were. Yeah,
so we gave them free tickets.
It's pretty remarkable.
The people who were there say, in fact, a Kennedy did show up. Ted Kennedy came.
Okay.
And arguably, Ted was the best of the brothers in terms of being a good politician.
Okay. Yes. Well, that is, I didn't
except
see
for the time he ran for president against Jimmy Carter. But other than that, he was actually pretty good at it.
Yeah.
Usually gave pretty good advice to his older brother.
Okay. And so was he there? He showed up? That's
documented? He showed up and said, we'll deal with you. This is terrible. We shouldn't have done that. And then he didn't show up. None of the other Kennedys showed up.
Well, they too were very busy at the time.
Anyway, they go on to interview people who were on the buses and get a sense of what's going on. But, just remarkable that it happened that nobody remembers. And the reason I started looking it up is, of course, I had seen references to it, but I was curious as to whether or not, what happened to them and how did it, end. Was it legal? Did they get sued? Well, actually, that's not what happened. They did use Otis Air Force Base at the time, and so that's exactly where they went, same as now. Only now it's a joint force base, so it's not an Air Force base.
Yeah, and there's a privatized portion of it. That probably won't pan out quite as much, but that's okay.
It didn't stop because they were sued out of existence.
Right.
It stopped because people were horrified by it. They thought it was incredibly cruel, and then therefore people stopped donating to the white citizens councils who were doing this, and they ran out of money.
Well, that's one way to do it. Yeah, we should look for that as a reaction. We have no idea exactly how. Well, now they're federally funding it by diverting funds, but yeah, it might change.
They have plenty of money now, and the scale is much larger. I'm just saying that it sort of backfired in the sense that they wanted this to make everybody look good, and that's not what happened.
Yeah.
The people who started this actually look bad.
They misread things all the time. They're
right. Our break is coming up, but that segues into this Politico piece over the weekend. A lesson from the past for Ron DeSantis. In the 60s, Southern organizations tried sending African Americans to northern states in a, quote, cheap PR stunt, end quote, designed to embarrass and expose northern liberals. It didn't work.
No. Nor did this one, but we have yet to shake it all out first. Right. But there's a lot there's a lot of details to this one that are particularly damning, so I hope we'll damn them for it.
This particular piece from Politico says they actually targeted Ted Kennedy. He was campaigning for a seat in the U.S. Senate at the time, and he was a summer resident of Hyannis. He called the segregationist bluff. He organized a reception for some of the people who came up, comprised of local residents who extended a warm welcome.
Okay. Well, that's very similar to what was happening now, although this time they waited until the summer residents were gone for some reason, and there's lots of speculation as to why.
Don't pick on Massachusetts. You're not going to get what you think you're going to get.
Yeah. And also the governor is Republican, so I'm not 100% sure what you thought you were going to do with that one, but I'm sure you think he's a rhino, but still, you're not going to get the, well, you know what? You will. From the New York Post, you will get the story you were looking for. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm not doing any pirate anything. I don't know. You got the point. Yeah, it's not.
We'll do it again next year on this day.
All right, yeah, we'll give it one more shot. Will it be Tuesday next year or Sunday? I forget which way the calendar goes. We'll find out. I'll talk to you in a year about it. But we're not done with the Martha's Vineyard story, although it isn't really a Martha's Vineyard story so much as a Ron DeSantis is a jerk story. But one thing I meant to mention earlier on in the discussion of the various ways in which this thing is particularly disgusting, and how the cruelty truly is the point. One of the other stories that emerged at the end of last week about this situation was while herding everyone onto this plane to fly them to, or two planes, as I understand it, to Martha's Vineyard, they had to fill out paperwork as they were leaving the migrant shelter that they were in San Antonio, and then boarding flights, etc., etc. These folks are, for the most part, as they've mentioned in the story earlier, Venezuelan and therefore seeking political asylum inside the United States, and on a technical point, are here legally as a result, because you're allowed to cross the border, and then if you immediately surrender yourself to immigration authorities and plead your case as a political refugee, you're entered into the court system, etc. And for the time being, while you're pleading your case, you are here legally, despite the fact that Ron DeSantis made sure to tell everyone they were illegal immigrants.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's okay to, point out these are humans. After all, they are, and that comes first. But, if you're covering this in the news, I would say the vast, vast majority of news reports are referring to them as migrants, which is okay.
That's an improvement, yes.
And if you're calling them illegal immigrants, you're a liar and you're already showing your political bias.
Yes. So that's certainly
but you're a liar because
points.
they're not illegal. By definition, they are legal.
True.
They're here as asylum seekers.
As it turns out, part of the plan, though, for Ron DeSantis was to make himself not a liar by turning them into illegal immigrants. And how was he going to do that?
By using fly-by-night, literally fly-by-night companies that disappear.
Right, and moving them around the country
and the whole
this way.
story of how that was paid for and where those companies went, how they came to be, who was behind them, and where they went is a story yet to be told. And a lot of it, this Politico story talking about the reverse freedom rides, in the end, the plan proved too clever by half. White political and business leaders never fully committed to funding it. And blacks were migrating to the north anyway at that particular time. And so none of it made any sense.
That's the thing.
It was a cheap trafficking in human misery on the part of Southern racists, the New York Times editorialized. That seems relevant today. The governor of Ohio likened it to Hitler and his Nazis forcing Jews out of Germany. Northern senators denounced the White Citizens Councils as cruel and callous and demonstrating a shameful lack of judgment. And President Kennedy, normally restrained in his condemnation of the White South, he needed the votes after all, responded that it's a rather cheap exercise.
Okay, that's an understated way of saying it. Yeah. The other part of this was as DeSantis and others were trying to turn them into, when I say they're trying to turn them into illegal immigrants, in order to leave the shelter where they were and to board these flights, you had to fill out paperwork, name, and a contact address. Where can we contact you? What's your address inside the United States where we can reach you for various things, including, by the way, your court hearings. That's part of the process, right? You come in as a political refugee, you declare yourself at the border, and they say, all right, we'll have a court hearing to determine whether or not you're entitled to political refugee status or whatever kind of refugee status it is you're seeking. But, you got to show up for the court date, or if you don't, you lose. You've defaulted here, and then you are set for deportation back to your country of origin because your petition has been denied. And one of the things that is the direct result of this is all these people have had, they were in San Antonio, Texas. They had court dates in San Antonio, Texas, some as soon as today, as this week. And now they're in Martha's Vineyard, but they went, or now they're in elsewhere in Massachusetts. They boarded the planes, of course, with promises that they were being entered into the system and that they would be able to settle their claims wherever they went. But instead, they'll they will by default lose their political asylum pleas starting today and then be considered to be illegal immigrants, just like Ron DeSantis wanted them to be in the first place. In addition, in filling out their paperwork while they were boarding the flights, apparently, I think the Border Patrol officialdom may have had a hand in this, but somewhere between DeSantis operatives and the border control officials who were handling these migrants in San Antonio, their paperwork all got filled out with fake addresses. In many cases, homeless shelters across the country, and in some cases as far away as Tacoma, Washington, which would again also reset where your court date was. You have X number of days, I assume, to appear in federal court and plead your case wherever you may be. And now there's paperwork in the system that says that these folks are, some of them, in Tacoma, Washington, when they are instead in Martha's Vineyard or Boston or somewhere in between. And they, too, will now be in default in showing up for their immigration hearings. And wow, I mean, these are guys.
The good news, if there is any good news in all of this, is as somebody tweeted over the weekend. I don't have the tweet exactly in front of me, but it said, sending all of those poor folks to the island of lawyers was probably not the smartest move DeSantis could think of. And in fact, they are going to all be represented at this point. And so, they'll have their day in court.
Yeah, well, that's good. And hopefully they'll be able to, plead this dirty trick. And the courts in And equity will see that this is, it would be unfair to be deporting them for having missed their court date because they were lured onto planes and told that they didn't have to go.
And that, of course, brought up all of the Alan Dershowitz jokes that you get to tell about this.
Yes.
So, it'll be all right.
Yeah.
Now that, as far as the feedback goes, Politico had this one, and this is probably not the headline that they were looking for. Sure, they'll get their jollies off in right-wing media bubbles, but that's not enough to win elections. Can't emphasize that enough. It doesn't matter. Yes, it's making a third of the country into zombies that you can't talk to, and it's making them into semi-fascists and semi-Nazis. In fact, over the weekend, Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania had a rally where he had everybody hold up their right hand.
Oh, why would they do that?
And Donald Trump at his poorly attended rally in Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio, had everybody hold up their finger to him. Not that
I would have done it. Oh,
the pointer finger, not the middle finger. The middle finger comes up because the NAFO folks actually got onto the internet and replaced in the Russian Telegram and Instagram channels all of their emojis with uncomplimentary ones, including the middle finger one. Okay. So instead of getting a like or a thumbs up, you got a middle finger up. So that was kind of cute.
Well,
but that's a side mention. This is the headline they were not looking for in Politico. Huge mistake. DeSantis' migrant transports could undercut support in South Florida. The move by DeSantis dominated the radio and television airwaves in South Florida, where large swaths of Hispanic voters live.
Yes.
This could hurt the Republican governor in November with a key constituency the GOP has sought to win over. The move by DeSantis dominated the radio and TV news. One Spanish radio host loudly denounced the move and even compared DeSantis' action to that of Fidel Castro. It's probably not what DeSantis was looking for, by the way. Democrat Charlie Crist, who's challenging DeSantis on Saturday, rushed out a new digital ad targeting Hispanics in the Venezuelan community as part of a six-figure buy, pounding DeSantis over his intention getting moved. From a Miami perspective, it's a huge mistake, said State Senator Annette Taddeo, Democratic challenging incumbent Representative Maria Elvira Salazar. All these Republicans, including my opponent, historically talk about socialism and communism, and we're standing up to these horrible dictators. The migrants are fleeing exactly what Republicans say they are fighting against. Venezuelan American community in Florida remains relatively small, but growing slice of voters in Florida. Recent estimates have said there's at least 200,000 Venezuelans in the state. What's DeSantis going to do? Start exporting Cubans to Hyannis?
Yeah.
That won't go over well.
No, not likely. By the way, if you live in either of these areas, Venezuelan cuisine is fantastic.
That's another story altogether.
Chance. So, but yeah, that's they'll anyway. If you get a chance and you run into Venezuelan migrants who have been brought there unwillingly, take care of them, and they'll take care of you.
Right. So again, this may or may not hurt them politically, but the idea that this is so obviously such a good thing, people need to wait on that. And see what happens. Probably the White Citizens Council were thrilled with the headlines they first got in the first couple of days, but ultimately it didn't work out that well for them, although their remnants are still around. Sure. And that's where that whole story about Stacey Abrams comes up.
Yeah, what's this story?
So in Georgia, this particular county, Forsyth County, doesn't have a particularly good racial history.
I see.
The New York Times headlines it thusly: in Georgia County with racist history, flyer paints Abrams as an invading enemy. A digital flyer featuring the logo of the Republican Party of Forsyth County urged residents to rally against Stacey Abrams, who was coming there on Sunday, are alarming and infuriating local Democratic leaders who said its message sounded dangerously evocative of the county's notoriously racist past. The Forsyth Republican Party announced that it was calling the rally off, using inflammatory language as if Miss Abrams, the Democratic nominee for governor, were an invading enemy. The flyer issued a call to action, encouraging conservatives and patriots to save and protect our neighborhoods. It emerged this week in response to news that Ms. Abrams will be campaigning alongside other members of the Democratic ticket in the area. They called Abrams and Senator Raphael Warnock, the incumbent Georgia Democrat seeking a full term, the designers of destructive radicalism and socialism, and warning they would be crossing over our county border and into the county seat. It said they would appear at our center, referring to a county arts building. And the text of the flyer surfaced on a local online conservative news outlet. But this particular county has a history of forcing black residents out.
Well,
the legacy of the campaign and the racist thinking that gave rise to it. A violent campaign by Forsyth County white residents in 1912 that pushed out thousands of black residents through intimidation and deadly force as late as 1987, when a group of civil rights activists were attacked while trying to mark the 75th anniversary of black residents' initial expulsion. So that's their history. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution says Forsyth GOP cancels protest aimed at Stacey Abrams. Melissa Klink, the head of Forsyth County's Democratic Party, opened a candidate forum Sunday by reminding liberal voters in the deep red area to find a way to get in the way. But over the last few days, it's been the local Republican Party that couldn't get out of its own way. As news spread that Stacey Abrams was coming, the local GOP issued a call to protest the candidates who were crossing over our county border. For many, it evoked memories of the country's painful past, shaped by violent racial cleansing in 1912 that forced much of the black population of roughly 1,100 people at the time to flee to neighboring areas. Facing mounting pressure, the Forsyth GOP called off the protest and said in a statement it would err on the side of caution.
Oh, now. Yeah, well, I'm pleased to see them erring on the side of caution. This is giving us a tremendous opportunity. I don't think they meant for this to be the case, to remind people of the real history
of the vote here. Mm-hmm. But in a very close race, and some polls say it's close, some other polls say it's not, but some polls say it's close. In a very close race, picking up 1 or 2% extra because you go there to campaign is smart politics.
Yeah. Yarg. I'd even say.
So you just do it.
Yes, right. I mean, that's the thing to do. You're running for governor. There's no electoral college situation there. You get the votes regardless of what county they're coming from. And there'll be a lot of people who would be inclined to vote for you anyway, and doubly so, and with great gusto and enthusiasm. And if I got yeah, exactly. You'd be able to generate that kind of enthusiasm just by showing up in the face of that kind of historical racism. There are plenty of people who I'm sure are well aware of what it means, even if they hadn't pulled this stunt, to show up in Forsyth County, and then doubly so if you go in the face of their threats.
Right. So in case you haven't seen it, I sent you a picture of the back of the arena view of Trump's Ohio rally.
Oh, okay. I will endeavor to take a look at that.
Right. That's the last thing I just
on
sent
it now.
you. And
Here
the
we go.
reason that I wanted you to see it, and of course I want all of you listening over the internets here to see it, is the place is fairly empty. Mm-hmm. And if you concentrate just up front on the podium with the people behind him, it looks like the place is full. Mm-hmm. But in fact, if you pull back and look at the entire arena, you see it's mostly empty. Yeah, so Trump had a fairly fascist, moment there where he had everybody hold their finger up. But it's not like all of Ohio was there in the millions.
One Bayraktar could have taken care of the whole crowd.
Pretty much. So, and that's how you do crowds these days. You know how many Bayraktars are? This is like a 3 Bayraktar crowd.
Right.
So,
you have to give them one Scaramucci's worth of notice to raise them, and then for each Scaramucci.
Well, if you only give a Scaramucci notice, you're only going to get a 1 Bayraktar crowd.
Yeah. It's a direct
It's about 3,000 people in the arena.
And it's a great picture, and it's illustrative of something we've mentioned a couple times on the show. This is standard political advance practice. You know you're not going to have a crowd that can fill the entirety of your space, and so you cordon off a smaller space and then put the You provide risers for the TV cameras and everything, and they're there to get a shot of a rally happening, not a shot of a rally
view.
flopping.
So they'll get the podium and whatever's behind the podium.
Yeah, and this is where you put them, and this is
which for
and
some
that's why
reason
they have
is
press
always
areas.
blacks for Trump. That same guy is always there.
Yep. And that's how you get the press into those
I hope
places
he gets a raise because he's got to travel all over the country.
Well, yeah, no raises for them. Those people don't get any money. Yeah. Anyway, so this is a great example of how they stage it. And have you tweeted that picture? How can we can distribute that?
Yeah, you've got that. You've got the tweet earlier up.
I see.
The actual tweet is by Andrea Preiser, I believe.
Okay. No, I mean, so for later,
Andrea
if I want to show
and
people.
It's right under the story that I'm going to do now from Vox on the Republican Party is an authoritarian outlier.
They are.
And then I wrote to you, see this tweet, and then see the one with Doug Mastriano.
All right. I'll look for that.
But the Republican Party is an authoritarian outlier, says Zach Beauchamp. Compared to center-right parties in developed democracies, the GOP is dangerously far from normal. At the state level, they've written electoral rules to block Democrats from voting and seize power from Democratic governors after they've won elections. All that's true, by the way. Just this week, DeSantis proposed a bill that would effectively criminalize anti-police violent protests and protect drivers who ran over protesters with their cars. This article was written in September of 2020, so it's been true for some time.
Yeah, I remember that idea.
And so the whole idea of the Republican Party really being different is true, and that's why I think it's important when Trump goes all Q, which is what he did at that rally. For a week, he was transmitting on whatever social channels are left to him Q memes.
Yes.
And then the holding up the finger is, where goes one, where goes all
something,
of us,
something,
or
one,
that thing
blah,
is.
blah, blah, and there's the
WYSIWYG,
one.
What you see is what you get, I think is what they're really trying to say.
Yeah. And, they have a whole slogan, and it involves a one, so now the finger in the air thing is, it's weird
where
looking.
Where go one of us, where go all of us, or,
where will we go
E pluribus unum.
Why?
But it all comes down to WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get.
That seems clear. All right. Well, they're very strange people, to say the least. And yes, he's gotten a lot more Q obvious in this last rally. Apparently, there was a lot more thematically. It was a lot more Q-ish, and lots of clips of his speech.
Well, he's become Q adjacent,
crazy,
which means he's bringing in the WERT.
Yeah, who's what? Oh, I see. I got you now. Yeah. He's become much more obvious.
Keyboard warriors, you'll know what that means.
And
keyboard commandos.
The lies have gotten to be just that much weirder. And of course, as usual, every accusation a confession. I think he spent a considerable amount of time insisting that Joe Biden was cognitively impaired and unfit for the job. And it's like, okay, I'm not talking about yourself or anything. But, for his crowd, they believe it. So,
right.
Or read another article. No, they don't. They just love it.
You said I was Q. I'm not Q. I'm Q adjacent. I'm QWERTY.
Right. Yeah, well, you're under arrest either way. So, don't know what to tell you. It's pretty remarkable what we have to sit through and listen to and allow, and what they cover and what they don't. This time comes up every time he has one of these crazy rallies, and I think, you never see this kind of coverage for Vermin Supreme, but look, he's running for president too. He's run more times than Trump. I don't understand why we don't do serious coverage and say, well, some people believe that you should wear boots on their heads. I don't know. I'm not certain why it is. Just happens.
The very close election in November is coming, and it is a very close election. The generic ballot now on 538 has Democrats 44.9, Republicans 43.5. That's actually an improvement for Democrats, which started somewhere around mid-August. And that's when the Democratic generic ballot started to creep up and surpass the Republicans, who had been running ahead for a year. And that is notable. Our best Democratic optimist, Simon Rosenberg, has a piece about that. Dems are closing strong. Republicans are closing as ugly as it gets, which I think about sums it up. But he's got some polling insights here, which I think are worthy of discussion. He says, bouncy, bouncy. The polling's been that 538 generic with the Dems up 1.5 points. It's a 4.2 shift since June. And he has these other things. Biden's approval has jumped almost 9 points. In a Fox News interview on Wednesday, August 3rd, McConnell said that there's a bluer reality to the election, but that matches, remember what we said about the Fox News poll, where according to their model, the Republicans pick up 1 seat, which is not enough to take the House. That doesn't mean we keep the House. What it means is that it's a closer election than the pundits are acknowledging. So let's look at some recent GOP polls, which might be leading McConnell to think this. As Echelon Insights has him even. Americans for Prosperity has Democrats up 3. Chamber of Commerce, Democrats up 5. Winning the Issues, Democrats up 6. Those are all GOP polls, average of 3.5. So they're Democrats. 6 more GOP-aligned polls, which initially had shown the GOP maintaining meaningful leads. That's now gone. Anywhere between a 3 to 10 point shift for the Democrats. And a recent poll from the John Locke Institute in North Carolina finds many of the same trends. Republicans went from plus 12 to plus 5 for the State House. Congressional generic went from R plus 11 to R plus 3. Beasley Budd that's the Senate race. Between North Sherry Carolina. Beasley and Ted Budd went from 40-45 Republican, R5, to 42 even. And Biden approval went from minus 27 to minus 17. So all of this is happening with movement in the proper direction. We know why. It's all about Roe Dobbs, depending upon how you like to refer to it. And that hasn't gone away. And part of the whole thing that we started with, not with International Talk Like a Pirate Day, but rather when we started with talking about the DeSantis cheap stunt, is the idea is supposed to shift the narrative away from how badly Republicans are getting hurt by abortion onto what's going to be a couple of day talking thing about what DeSantis did, and then it's old news and it fades. The abortion thing is not fading. You simply can't take something that's actually real in people's lives like this and change the subject and think, I've succeeded. Aren't I a political genius?
That's true.
Not how it works.
Oh, yeah, I have something for that.
That's
not how this works!
There you go.
That's not how any of it works.
That's right. Well, and I got an interesting tweet in the KITM hashtag a couple of days ago that testifies to that. Just, I think, an interesting write-up or maybe Twitter thread about people who are just having those conversations with neighbors and coworkers, a lot of whom were Republican voters, and giving their various reasons spontaneously, apparently, for why they, just weren't going to vote at all because they couldn't stomach anybody, or were going to vote Democratic this time, despite the fact that they voted Republican in the past. And it all comes down to abortion and worries that every woman in their lives was endangered as a result of this crazy policy, and they just didn't agree with it.
I think the guys aren't getting it.
Yeah.
I think they just don't really understand, and they say, okay, yeah, I saw the data that says that this is important. Let me talk about how DeSantis is doing a manly man kind of thing and sending all these people and taking credit and leading and being strong. And all the women say, I know what you're talking about. I'm talking about this because this
difference
is really
in perspective. Just like the photo you showed, all the men are standing on the stage looking at the crowd and saying, wow, I can't believe, look at the support we have here. And the women are standing in the back of the arena saying, this place is 3/4 empty. Nobody sees it.
Right. So Maggie Haberman tweeted, a few weeks ago, Trump posted a video with a song called Mirrors on a social media website. People noticed it sounded like the QAnon theme song. Then he posted a Q meme about himself, and then he played the song during the rally, and the crowd reacted with salutes.
Fun.
So one of the reasons that the crowd was so small is that he probably just got all the Q people to come. Yes, and the folks who go from rally to rally to rally because that's their lives. That's okay.
Yeah, you know.
But don't mistake that for the entire country thinks this.
No, that's clearly not the case, and that's why those pictures are so important, and why reminding ourselves from time to time that they represent at most something in the neighborhood of 20-something% of the country in terms of answering polls in ways that are provocative, in terms of whether or not they'll show up for whatever it is, whether it's voting or the civil war they think they want. I don't know. But, yeah, it's worth reminding yourself from time to time how few they really are.
Anyway,
so let's do it.
That's it.
Okay. That seems fair. It's a lot. And there's still more. There's about 5 million other things that we didn't even get to that are equally weird and stupid. But I have them available to share with you during the next segment or so.
Right.
Next
well,
two
I'll
segments.
just end again. I have the actual tweets of some of the people who were saying stuff about Martha's Vineyard. So let's go full circle and just get the wording right. This is Sarah Zhang writing. If I wanted to be cruel to a bunch of powerless people, I would probably not send them to Lawyer Island, which is true. John Fusselgang breaking. Venezuelan Christian refugees illegally trafficked by Ron DeSantis, warmly welcomed by every Martha's Vineyard restaurant that turns away Alan Dershowitz. This one from Daniel Ulfelter, who's a lawyer in Florida, breaking. The law firm representing 30 of the 48 migrants flown to Martha's Vineyard at the direction of DeSantis asked Massachusetts and federal officials to open a criminal investigation into the incident on Saturday. I'm not exactly clear on how this works, but apparently Massachusetts has better laws in regarding temporary visas and applications that allow you to stay there if you've made that compared to other states.
Okay. Well, then they'll be able to offer more help to people, and that's good news.
The lawyers among us could clarify what I said, but I believe it's true. And, there it is. So there's our music, and there's your break. And then you'll be back with whatever you want to talk about after the break. Right. And I'm gone, and I'll see you Wednesday. Okay.
Well, I already have a question for you for Wednesday. I'm all set for that. We'll bide our time. Okay, I won't. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. A pathetic effort at making it talk like a pirate day. It's too difficult to think about that. And there's too much news, and we have to share it all. And let's see, we're going to make our best effort at getting around to the other stories, some of which are connected to these. Everything's connected in some way or another. Either different tangents or other outrages entirely. We'll see how we can fit this in. Let's see. First of all, I don't know. Which one should we say first of all? First of all, we'll make this one from the Washington Post. I guess a confirmation of what we already knew to be the case. Congressman Matt Gaetz sought a pardon related to the Justice Department sex trafficking probe in which he finds himself caught up because he's a sex trafficker. Testimony by a former White House aide is the first indication that the congressman sought protection from the inquiry. Sorta, kind of, I guess. It's the 15th indication that he sought protection, and it's probably like the 900th time that someone has speculated that the reason he was looking for a pardon was to get him out of the investigation for sex trafficking. But I guess this is the first Trump White House official to say, I definitely heard that he wanted a pardon for this reason. And so, how did we get it? Well, the answer is the January 6th committee, I believe. Congressman Matt Gaetz told a former White House aide that he was seeking a preemptive pardon from President Donald Trump, remember that guy, regarding an investigation in which he is a target, according to testimony given to the House Select Committee, the January 6th one. I won't have to give you their full name. Johnny McEntee is the blabbermouth in this case, which is fantastic. Congratulations to you, Johnny. We've heard that name before, and we have some vague idea that he was a hanger-on in one way or another and was a, personal body guy at some point, I think, to Trump, which is a big job. Not belittling him. Johnny McEntee, according to people familiar with his testimony, told investigators that Gaetz told him during a brief meeting, quote, that they are launching an investigation into him. That is, this is a quote of McEntee telling the committee. It's not McEntee quoting Gaetz per se, but he's definitely trying to give you a flavor for the kind of request that Gaetz was making. So he told the committee they are launching an investigation into him, or that there's an investigation into him. It's either launching or it's already underway, without specifying who was investigating Gates. McEntee added that Gates told him he did not do anything wrong, but they are trying to make his life hell. And if the president could give him a pardon, that would be great. Gates told McEntee that he asked the White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows for a pardon. And he was, I guess, just following up with Johnny McEntee. Asked by investigators if Gates' request for a pardon was in the context of the Justice Department investigation into whether Gates violated federal sex trafficking laws, McEntee replied, "I think that was the context, yes." According to people familiar with the testimony, who spoke on condition of anonymity, of course, the testimony is the first indication that Gates was specifically seeking a pardon for his own exposure related to the Justice Department inquiry into whether he violated sex trafficking laws. His public posture in the final months of the Trump administration was much less specific, repeatedly calling for broad preemptive pardons to fend off possible Democratic investigations. McEntee testified that Gates met him briefly one evening and discussed the issue of a pardon, but McEntee could not recall whether their conversation happened before or after the January 6th insurrection, according to people familiar with the testimony. I guess that would help narrow things down. Like if on January 5th you ask for a pardon and you're non-specific about it, I guess at that point you could say, well, it's likely that that is a pardon for the sex trafficking thing. Although you could also argue, actually, that's premeditated understanding of just how violent tomorrow's activity is going to be. So I'm not certain how much it matters when he asked, so much as much more important would be, yeah, he said to me, there's a sex trafficking thing I'd like to get out of, and would you give me a pardon for that? That would be more definitive. The Justice Department investigation into whether Gates paid for sex, paid for women to travel across state lines to have sex, a lot of state line problems these days for Florida people, and had a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old, was opened in the final months of the Trump administration with approval from Attorney General William Barr. The probe stemmed from a federal investigation of Gates' friend, who is now a convicted sex trafficker. That'll tend to implicate you a little bit. Gates has denied paying for sex. I never paid my bills. Or having sex with a minor as an adult, which is just, I'm lying about that. I don't want to be convicted of this. McEntee did not respond to repeated requests for comment. Neither Meadows nor his lawyer immediately responded to requests for comment. The spokesperson for Gates declined to address the testimony or whether Gates discussed a pardon with McEntee or Meadows, and instead responded that Gates never directly asked Trump for a pardon. Wink, wink. Congressman Matt Gaetz discussed pardons for many other people, publicly and privately, at the end of President Donald Trump's first term. The spokesperson wrote in an email, as for himself, President Trump addressed this malicious rumor more than a year ago, stating, Congressman Matt Gaetz has never asked me for a pardon. Representative Gaetz continued to stand by President Trump's statement. He stands by everything about Trump. It's just like standing near him. The House Select Committee also declined to comment. The FBI also declined to comment. That's bad writing, but there it is. Gaetz has not been charged with any crimes, but Joel Greenberg, a Gaetz associate and former tax collector for Seminole County, Florida, pleaded guilty in the spring of 2021 to 6 criminal charges, including sex trafficking of a minor. Greenberg agreed to cooperate fully with prosecutors and testify in court and has been providing investigators with information about Gaetz since 2020, the Washington Post previously reported. The last time I had a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old, I was 17, Gaetz has previously said. Okay. On November 25th, 2020, weeks after Trump lost the presidential election, Gaetz told Fox News that Trump should pardon everyone from himself to his administration officials to Joe Exotic if he has to. But anyway, I'm sure it had nothing to do with sex trafficking. Sure. Cassidy Hutchinson, a top White House aide to Meadows, told the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack that she recalled Gaetz and Mo Brooks both advocating for a blanket pardon for lawmakers who attended a December 21st meeting at the White House to discuss efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. In the previously aired testimony, she said they also advocated for pardons for a handful of other members that were not at the December 21st meeting. Hutchinson added that Gates, however, was personally pushing for a pardon since early December, but the focus of that pardon request was not clear from Hutchinson's testimony. I'm not sure why Mr. Gates would reach out to me to ask if he could have a meeting with Mr. Meadows about receiving a presidential pardon, she added. Brooks, who put a request for a pardon in an email to the White House aide at the time, defended his actions in a statement after Hutchinson's testimony, saying there was concern Democrats would abuse the judicial system by prosecuting and jailing Republicans for objecting in Congress to the certification of the election. Eric Hirschman, a former Trump White House lawyer, told investigators that he also believed that Gates was seeking a pardon, according to an excerpt of the deposition played during one of the committee's public hearings. The general tone was, we may get prosecuted because we were defensive of, the president's positions on these things, Hirschman recalled. The pardon that he was requesting, was as broad as you can describe. From the beginning, I remember he is from the beginning of the time up until today for any and all things. Then he mentioned Nixon, and I said Nixon's pardon was never nearly that broad. Gates ultimately did not receive a pardon from Trump. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me that he was discussing pardons in a broader context. He didn't want. He's conscious of just how much trouble he could get in, both for the trafficking and for asking for and then ultimately possibly even receiving a pardon for sex trafficking charges. And so he's trying not to bring it up. But what do you want a pardon for? Well, I think we should be generally pardoned for all things. You never know what these Democrats are going to make up about us. We need to have a pardon that's as broad as possible. And didn't Nixon get pardoned for everything? No, it was not that broad, actually. All right, well, maybe we could do it. There's always a first time. Well, what do you need to be pardoned for? Never mind. Just, generally, everything. Couldn't we just do it that way? So I guess that's why they need to have something on the record from Johnny McAtee. And it's important to have him saying, they're trying to make my life hell by opening this investigation. Oh, so something specific. And it was for you. An investigation of you in particular and around this time. And I think the conclusion is probably correct. All right. Well, there's lots more on related subjects here, but also I note that Greg had sent me a couple other things after concluding the call. I was just I should check in on what are those bits of information here, and are they relevant to what we're talking about immediately? Some of them are preparation for next Wednesday when I have specific questions about a different topic, but it looks like there's some more Martha's Vineyard information here. Okay. But apparently they've got a hold, I suppose, of some of the, copies of the documentation filled out on behalf of these migrants, which will stand as, eventually, as evidence of the deception and fraud involved in getting the people on the planes in the first place. But okay, we can return to that subject again later on, or perhaps later on in the week. And let me get back to the other things I've pocketed for you here. What was I reminded of as I was reading the requests for pardons? Yes, just in terms of his insistence. Oh, no, I never asked for a pardon for that, or it was really for other things, or very broad pardons, just sort of essentially misleading investigators about what you were talking about, and your explanation for events reminded me that there was also news elsewhere in the Washington Post this time. Oh, and I think actually I should jump back and give credit for the first Post article, because I think that it's actually one of the same reporters here. Where was I on the Matt Gaetz thing? Here it is. So let's see. The Gaetz story was from Jacqueline Almany and Amy Gardner. And I think that Jacqueline Almany is also on the byline of this other article I was reminded of, and maybe maybe she was trying to get me to make that connection. I am not sure. Yeah, Jacqueline Almany, Josh Dawsey, and Rosalind Helderman together on this Washington Post piece. Trump team claimed boxes at Mar-a-Lago, remember those, were only news clippings. Now, there were some news clippings in there, but this seems important just generally for understanding the evolution of the fight between the good folks at Mar-a-Lago and the Justice Department and the National Records Administration, National Archives and Records Administration. So, subheader here reads, the 2021 assertion to the National Archives vastly misrepresented the scale and variety of documents, including classified documents, not that it matters, later recovered from Trump's property. What's going on here? Months before the National Archives officials retrieved hundreds of classified documents in 15 boxes from former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago club. Remember, that was back in like February, right? But months before that, they were told that none of the material was sensitive or classified and that Trump only had 12 boxes of news clippings, according to people familiar with the conversations between Trump's team and the archives. That's going to look bad on the record when the legal case proceeds for these folks. During a September 2021 phone call with top archives lawyer Gary Stern, former Deputy White House counsel Pat Philbin offered reassuring news. Philbin said he had talked to former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, who made the assertion about the dozen boxes of clippings the people familiar with the call said. Whether this is going to fall on Philbin for believing him or on Meadows for saying it, and whether or not Meadows will deny saying it, I guess still needs to be worked out. But Trump's team was aware of no other materials, Philbin said, relaying information he said he got from Meadows. And he might argue, yeah, in olden days you used to be entitled to the presumption of innocence in taking the word for a former White House chief of staff, but not this time. The characterization made in the call vastly misrepresented the scale, as we now know, and variety of documents, including classified records eventually recovered by the archives or the FBI. It does lead you to wonder, though, I mean, just how careless were these people that they were asked, so what's in the boxes? Oh, nothing. Newspaper clippings, just newspaper clippings. So no government documents? No. No classified documents? Oh, certainly not. No, nothing else is in there. Nope. It's newspaper clippings. And I mean, that's plausible. A president might leave office with 12 boxes of newspaper clippings about his time in office. That's entirely possible. So, you can't immediately say, based on that they're lying. It's just that based on everything else, they're able to determine that they're lying. And lo and behold, they did get to make a search of the place and turn up those documents and say, well, that's clearly not true anymore. What's amazing is that in all that time, the crack staff at Mar-a-Lago never said, you know what we should do? I'm starting to think that they're suspicious of what's in these boxes. First of all, there's 15 and we said there were 12. Not a big deal, but not great. But we just finished telling them that it's all newspaper clippings. Shouldn't we, if we know that this stuff is classified or otherwise government material, shouldn't we move that stuff out of there so that if they ever say, well, can you prove it? And they come and they take the boxes and we want to look in them, then they'll find nothing. And they just did not do that, which might argue, you might say, well, that just proves that they didn't know what was in there. But of course, for purposes, say, of the Espionage Act, that really doesn't matter unless you can prove, then that's where the story of, well, you planted them would come in, I guess, if you could prove that, or even open the door to making it sound plausible, which it's clearly not. But anyway, that's an interesting aspect to things, to be on the record saying, nope, we checked, or should have checked if we were going to make this kind of high-level representation to you, that the former Deputy White House Counsel, what was Philbin's? Former Deputy White House Counsel, Pat Philbin, speaking for the ex-president's office here. I spoke to the former Chief of Staff, White House Chief of Staff, about this. you're making a pretty serious representation here. And you didn't check at all? Philbin said that Meadows also told him no documents had been destroyed, according to 2 people with knowledge of the call, and a third person with knowledge of Stern's contemporaneous account of the call. These and other people spoke skeekle poke. How about that? That was a really good... These and other people spoke on the condition of anonymity to disclose internal details. Stern had sought the call because he believed there were still more than two dozen boxes of materials that Trump had, and he also had concerns about whether digital records had been properly retained. Ooh, we haven't really talked much about that. According to a person with knowledge of the situation, top archives officials continued to believe there was more material than they were being told about, according to people familiar with their thinking. A spokesperson for Philbin declined to comment. A person close to Philbin said he was unaware of the contents of the boxes and did not know there was classified material in them, and shouldn't have made the representation that there was not, really. Mr. Meadows did not personally review the boxes at Mar-a-Lago and did not have a role in examining or verifying what was or wasn't contained within them. Ben Williamson, a spokesman for Meadows, said in a statement Friday night after the article was published online. And again, at some point, they probably should have said, well, you might all be on the hook for the Espionage Act, so maybe you want to take a look. But apparently not. And it's their job to know. And if they want to make a representation based on somebody told me something from somebody else, that's why you have people who are deputy White House counsel, they go to law school and everything, and they at some point have to say, yeah, you're really going to have to check. Somebody's going to have to be on the hook here. You're going to have to either I check or I will accept from you a written affidavit saying you did. But yeah, probably shouldn't have taken the word of Mark Meadows for it. Anyway, in the year since the call, Archives and Justice Department officials have recovered 42 boxes of records from Trump's Palm Beach, Florida property, including 15 handed over by Trump representatives to the archives last January, and an additional 27 boxes retrieved by the FBI during a court-authorized search of Mar-a-Lago last month. The records recovered by the FBI included documents that detailed top-secret U.S. operations and information about a foreign government's nuclear capabilities, the Washington Post has reported. Some of the documents retrieved by the archives have also been torn up, which Trump had a habit of doing. So also that brings you back to, well, you swore to me that none of the documents had been destroyed. Yeah, about that. The new details about Philbin's call show that Meadows was more deeply involved in the communications with archives officials than previously known. Some White House advisors had previously said Meadows was deeply involved in the final packing at the White House. The Justice Department has conducted interviews with archives officials and subpoenaed documents from the archives as part of their probe into Trump's mishandling of classified documents. Officials are seeking to understand what the archives was told and whether Trump's representations were honest. I can tell you now, they were not, according to people familiar with the matter. In an email to Trump's lawyers in May 2021, previously reported by the Post, Stern wrote that there were roughly 24 boxes and that they were kept in the White House residence, had been previously kept in the White House residence and had yet to be returned to the archives. How do they know this? Because the archives actually controls their paperwork pretty tightly, right? So if the president says he wants to take it to the residence, that's wrong. It's a bad idea. You shouldn't allow it. Absolutely not. But if you do it, the archives will track the boxes. And they know the boxes are there, and they know pretty much what's in the boxes. They don't know what might have been taken out or put in the meantime, but they know what was in them when they left for the residence, and then they know that they were never returned. And, you're probably not going to fool them on that. So let's see, where were we here? Right. In an email to Trump lawyers in May 2021, previously reported, there were the 24 boxes yet to be returned to the archives, despite a determination by former White House counsel Pat Cipollone, you remember Patsy Baloney, in the final days of the administration that they need to be. So that's interesting, too. Your own lawyer says, by the way, before you go, you have to return those boxes. To which Trump says, to hell with that, I'm leaving with the boxes. All right, do you still have the boxes? Yes. Did you destroy anything in them? No. Is there any secret documents in there? No. Any government records? No. Just press clips. Everything's intact. All lies. And all on the record. Not great. In court filings, the Justice Department has released an email from the archives to Trump's counsel stating that NARA officials had ongoing communications with Trump's representatives throughout 2021 to try to secure the missing presidential records, which resulted in the transfer of only the first 15 boxes. See, this is all relevant to the use of a search warrant. I know they keep complaining, and they could have asked me, and they did this by force, and they didn't have to. They've been doing this for a year, and at every turn you've lied to them about how much material you had, what kind of material it was, and what state it was in, until they eventually ran out of patience and had to seize them from you. Trump told conservative radio host Hugh Hewitt on Thursday that there would be, oh yes, right, of course, problems in the country, the likes of which perhaps we've never seen before. Sounds like I'm going to be using rhetoric, the likes of which you've never heard before, except for every time I open my mouth. Okay. Why would we see such trouble if he were indicted on charges of mishandling classified records? I don't know. I don't think the people of the United States would stand for it, Trump said. No, they would all bring lawn chairs to watch your execution. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But I'd watch. Trump's legal team has said the documents seized include some personal records. They have argued that the former president has an absolute right to access to his presidential records and suggested that it is possible that some of the documents marked classified may have been declassified before Trump left office. Doesn't matter. However, his lawyers have not formally asserted that any were declassified or otherwise addressed concerns that Trump might have been improperly storing national security secrets at his Florida club. On Thursday, U.S. District Court Judge Eileen Cannon appointed Raymond J. Deary, a former chief federal judge in New York, as a special master to sort through the documents seized by the FBI to see whether any should be shielded from criminal investigators because of attorney-client or executive privileges. The Justice Department is barred from using any of these documents in its criminal probe until Deary reviews them, significantly slowing down the inquiry. So you knew about that. That part wasn't news, but it's a good reminder. There is further development on that front too, if we get to it, but there are many other things that we want to try and deal with first. Here's an interesting story. Will we be able to fit, should we wait for this one until afterwards? Because, our next break is coming up. You know what? Maybe what we can do is take a quick look at this thread, because it's related, of course, to the Mar-a-Lago documents and the special master. Secrets and Laws is the tweeter here, a former CIA attorney, occasionally addressing all things related to national security, etc. At least that's the claim in the Twitter bio here. And they begin with this non-exhaustive list of what will need to happen when litigating the classified documents before the special master. Remember that Cannon thinks this will be a brief pause. This is in addition to getting a protective order in place, as explained here. And the first tweet of this refers to another tweet thread in which Secrets and Laws says, well, I'll give you one example of the things that are wrong with the order here. She, that is the judge, doesn't appear to have contemplated whether a protective order needs to be in place. Protective orders are common in any civil litigation involving confidential or privileged information, and it lays out how the information is handled. And in particular, let's just read a little bit more of this, a process for making filings under seal and then having them reviewed and redacted before being docketed so that confidential or privileged information isn't released publicly. You get the idea. This is a whole second thread, but apparently the judge gave no consideration to how will we handle these documents, and do we need to have a protective order so that the special master or any of the people working for him don't either inadvertently or purposefully reveal the contents of any of these documents. And apparently that would be standard operating procedure for someone who knew what they were doing, but this judge has ignored it to this point. But in other issues that the special master himself will have to deal with, since Deary is still a judge, he won't have to get clearance. He won't have to be cleared. The government doesn't require clearances for federal judges. But any staff he wants to hire will have to be cleared and then be read into the various compartments at issue. So that's going to be an issue. Luckily, we at least avoid that. There was the worry that, well, this judge will have all of these confidential or classified materials. That seems to be okay for federal judges, just not yet for staff. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's jump back in then to the Twitter thread from Secrets and Laws, who is running down, as he says, a non-exhaustive list of things that the special master will have to deal with and why it might not be properly considered to be a brief pause in the investigation, as Judge Cannon would have you believe. So first was, of course, the issue of handing over all these classified documents to a special master. Does that pose any clearance issue or anything of the sort? Well, apparently not for a federal judge. So, they very frequently have to deal with these things. There are, of course, specialized courts for surveillance cases like the the FOIA courts. Not FOIA courts, but rather the FISA courts. Otherwise, dealing with classified information, not typically a problem for a sitting federal judge, but anybody he wants to hire to help with the work, clerks and any other lawyers to help review the documents, just so that the special master himself isn't personally responsible for reading every single one all by himself and has got some other opinions to turn to. There's going to need to be a clearance process for those people. Some of them he may hire from a pool of people who already have security clearance. I don't know, but that's a possibility too. Let's see. Of course, then there's another side to it entirely. Trump's counsel will have to be cleared. It's likely that not all of them will have to be, but our writer here says, I'm also dubious that lawyer, what's the first name of his lawyer? Trusty. His last name is Trusty. Jim, Trusty Joe, Trusty John, Frank, Donald. I don't know. Trusty's clearance. Apparently he had a clearance at one point, but highly dubious that it's still active. Anyway, they'll receive what's called a limited security approval. I could see DOJ objecting to Corcoran since he has exposure or at least is a witness. And then there's some other issues that come up in this too. I don't know whether this thread mentions them, but in terms of getting security clearances for Trump's team, the problem with his team of lawyers, and maybe they were chosen for this purpose, to trip this whole thing up. Who knows? You wonder, why did he select some of the losers that he did? And it turns out, well, one of the lawyers, Corcoran, he might be a witness or even a co-conspirator in this case. So probably not wise to give him a security clearance along the way. That would probably stand in the way of him succeeding of that. And then, as it turns out, and it may or may not be discussed in this thread, some of his other lawyers have some undisclosed foreign lobbying entanglements. which would likewise raise red flags and stand in the way ordinarily of them getting a security clearance. So anyway, as he says, I could see DOJ objecting to Corcoran since he has exposure, or at least as a witness. They'll have to figure out where to securely store these classified documents. They'll need a SCIF, of course. And where are they going to put this? But they'll have to put it somewhere convenient to Deary, but also to Trump's counsel. And even Trump himself can access, he's got to be able to access these things in order to help prepare his own defense. Deary will want them in Brooklyn. Trusty is in D.C. Kais, one of the other lawyers for Trump, is in Florida. So the documents will have to be copied and securely transported to those SCIF locations. You can't just email TS, SCI, SAP records, even on a classified computer network. Given the volume and lack of infrastructure, they'll likely needed to be transported by hand. So this could be rather a massive undertaking. Trump's counsel will need a classified laptop for drafting their filings. They'll complain about whatever the government gives them, too, though, that's probably part of the strategy, right? They'll also want their own workspace, and they'll complain about whatever condition the government imposes. Trump's counsel may want to talk to other people from the Trump White House to determine whether executive privilege claims are viable. If so, there will be a big fight about this with the DOJ as it delegates access determinations to Deary and Trump's counsel. If Trump prevails, the witnesses will have to be cleared and read in too. You can't talk about classified topics on an open phone line, so they'll have to travel and meet with his counsel in person in a secure facility. Trump's counsel will need to get the classified filing off the laptop and get it to Deary. Again, if it's got TS, SCI information in it, that's not easy since you can't just email it. Thumb drives are also no bueno. While Cannon said the classified filings could be under seal, they still need to be properly marked, and media organizations will sue to get them. For this reason, DOJ is likely to propose a walled-off classification review, whereby Trump's filings are sent to the relevant classification authorities without the DOJ prosecution team seeing them, who will A, properly mark them, and B, propose redactions so that they can be publicly docketed. The briefing schedule will need to allow for this. Also, does this mean that the DOJ team won't have, if they're supposed to be walled off in their investigation and not be allowed to see certain of these classified or supposedly privileged documents, it'll be interesting what a disadvantage to put for the DOJ. I don't know if this is really being discussed here or not, whether maybe there's some sort of weird exception that, you'd think that they'd build in an exception, but could it possibly be the case that the Department of Justice prosecutors for this case won't actually be allowed to see certain of the documents that Trump is producing in his own defense? How do you refute those arguments supported by those documents if only one side is allowed to see those documents? That's an inherently imbalanced situation, and also usually upside down and backwards from where the government usually finds itself if there's an issue of limited availability of a classified document, that they should be available to the person who isn't in government but not available to the people who are. It seems completely backwards for classified information, especially government's own classified information. How do you justify that? And that's one of, the real tragedy of this stupid order is it stands everything on its head. But, that's the way it is around Trump, I guess. All right, where were we here? Right. DOJ will need to go through all these same steps in crafting its responses, although it already has the infrastructure in place to do so. That is, getting it reviewed by the relevant authorities and redacted if necessary before publicly docketing your filings. Deary will have to draft his rulings in a classified space on classified computers and then send them out for walled-off classification review. So at every step, every document going forward dealing with the pleadings in this paperwork situation, all the decisions and all of the pleadings will have to go through a classification process and redaction process themselves. No more released on a Friday and digested and live tweeted from the courtroom until after they're redacted. So we're going to wait a long time for some of these documents and some of the pleadings. Same process with Cannon when she makes her rulings when one side appeals to her. Same process with the 11th Circuit if there's an appeal. Now you can understand why DOJ would normally assert the state secrets privilege to prevent all this from happening. It creates risk. Usually it's the government prosecuting people who don't have a platform from which to, just as Trump has no such platform, but has invented one for himself by virtue of the fact that he says he was once legitimately president of the United States. But ordinarily, it's the government prosecuting people who don't have or even attempt to make any special claim to have their own system of privilege here and stand it upside down with respect to the government. But that's why the government operates under state secrets framework, really just to be able to keep the trial process moving. But now this is interesting. I mean, not only the special master just creates a third set of people who are going to have to clear every single thing that they read, write, or otherwise produce. This could take forever. And then if you add the 11th Circuit to it, well, then there's a bunch of judges there who have to do the same thing. Now, as you say, you can understand why DOJ would normally assert the state secrets privilege to prevent all this from happening. It creates risk. Not only is there all this red tape, but of course, every one of these red tape junctures is where a leak can happen. The good news, if there is any, is that the DOJ has a team of people who are used to doing all this in criminal cases, called Classified Information Security Officers, or CISOs. They are very professional and will be able to move quickly if utilized here, but still all this takes some time. And again, rest assured that Trump's counsel will complain every step of the way in an attempt to create even more delay. If one thing should make make it feel better, make the situation feel better, it's the mental picture of Trump having to travel to a skiff to review the documents. Unlike what you sometimes see in the movies, these skiffs are not nice. They are windowless, ugly, uncomfortable rooms. He'll hate it. Good times. That's the conclusion of this. Oh, and look, first thing I see here is Greg Dworkin's response asking for a thread reader app unrolling of this thing. So I guess at some point we meant to discuss this, but maybe Martha's Vineyard intervened. I wonder how long that other tangential thread that began or that was cited in the first thread is in. Not too long. Let's take a look at this. This was Secrets and Laws discussing there are a lot of really smart people on this site, but I think we've still got a few more layers of the onion to peel back regarding how awful this ruling, Cannon's ruling, is. Put another way, it's a Russian nesting doll of absurdity. And that's where the nesting dolls come from. It doesn't have anything at this point to do with Russia. Then the one we read that was connected to the first thread. I'll give you one example, that Judge Cannon doesn't appear to have contemplated whether a protective order needs to be in place. Let's read a little bit about protective orders in this discussion. Such an order ordinarily would lay out how information is handled, and in particular, a process for making filings under seal and then having them reviewed and redacted before being docketed so that confidential or privileged information isn't released publicly. And the protective order prevents both parties from just revealing the protected information outside of the context of litigation. For instance, technically, nothing is preventing the Department of Justice from publicly releasing non-classified contents of the records, for instance, in response to a Freedom of Information Act request for the agency records found at Mar-a-Lago. It wouldn't do so, though, for numerous reasons. But Cannon's injunction technically enjoined the use of the records for criminal investigative purposes only. So, Trump should want a protective order. And if we got to the point of classified records going before the special master, the Department of Justice would want a protective order that addresses the same issues with those documents. Such a protective order is entered under CIPA, C-I-P-A, which I don't know if I could tell you offhand exactly what it stands for, but CIPA Section 3, in every criminal case involving classified information. CIPA doesn't apply here, but DOJ would still want something in place to address handling, filing under seal, redactions, etc. This is true even though criminal penalties already apply. And I guess at this point I will just go and look up CIPA and get that. No, it's not Children's Internet Protection Act. That can't be it, right? Something else? Classified Information Procedures Act. There we go. That's more likely it. Well, that's interesting. Sometimes you run into a single acronym that stands for both things. All right, where were we with this thread? First, it's important to document how the filing and review process will work. Second, the penalty of violating a court order is a good additional deterrent for the lawyers involved. And ironically, the protective order should allow the government to conduct a classification review and propose redactions for Trump's court filings before they are publicly docketed, even though she seems to think their classified status is in dispute. Anyway, she doesn't appear to have contemplated any of this. Department of Justice will raise it if the 11th Circuit doesn't grant a stay. The parties will then have to meet and confer. They won't agree on what a protective order should say, and then there will be 1 to 2 weeks of litigation on just that point alone, if not more. Anyway, this is the most obvious next step in litigation of this nature, and Judge Cannon doesn't appear to have spent 2 seconds thinking about it beyond adding a single sentence to her special master order saying everything with protected information should be filed under seal. But it's not that simple, and yet she still thinks this will only be a brief pause in the investigation. Doesn't sound like Secrets and Laws agrees with that. And sounds like, it's not difficult to anticipate that things will be more complicated than anybody anticipated and will take much longer than certainly this judge has been willing to say. All right, let's see. A couple of other things that ought to be brought to your attention. Here's a total shift in focus, but something I thought was pretty interesting that I spotted over the weekend, someone tweeting about it. You may recall in one of the more recent and more egregious Supreme Court decisions, the case of the high school football coach who insisted, I guess, on bringing the team out to the 50-yard line right in the middle of the field before game time and holding a group prayer, and certain of the various of the team members saying, yeah, I kind of felt coerced into doing that. That was kind of obvious that you were not going to be in good with the coach if you didn't agree to participate in this thing. But the whole thing about whether or not you could coerce these prayers, and the Supreme Court deciding in favor of this coach and saying that he was protected from firing for having led these prayers. And it also became obvious in reading the opinion that certain justices, notably Alito, were perfectly willing to misstate what I think were otherwise established earlier as plain facts of the case by pretending that this was some sort of private prayer situation done in the coach's own time because the game wasn't yet underway, as opposed to, well, if you come running out of the locker room with your team straight from through the tunnel, straight from the locker room, if they even have a tunnel, I don't know, and into the stadium and then onto the 50-yard line, that's not really your own time, and there's certainly nothing private about the prayer. But they just wanted to see it this way in order to reach this conclusion. But as many commentators have noted, if you are willing to lie to yourselves about what the basic facts of the case are, the chances are you will end up issuing a ruling that will very quickly embarrass you because reality will intrude on this stupid bubble fantasy you've constructed and show that your solution is unworkable. And guess what? It has. The news reported by the Seattle Times, the story of the praying Bremerton coach keeps getting more surreal. Our writer here is Danny Westneat, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it's spelled like Westneat, N-E-A-T, unless he's Westneat or something like that. But get this story. When the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in June that Bremerton assistant football coach Joseph Kennedy had the right to pray on field, it wasn't widely understood then that the court had also ordered the school district to give him his job back, right? The day of the ruling, Fox News host Sean Hannity expressed doubts that the district would follow through because, of course, every Republican accusation is a confession. Well, they won't follow through because they're going to ignore the Supreme Court because that's what we would do if we had lost. Anyway, not true. But one of Kennedy's lawyers clarified that they had no choice. We're ready to have that fight. If they want to defy the Supreme Court, I think they're going to realize they made a serious mistake. Well, of course they didn't want to defy the Supreme Court. They went ahead and complied with the Supreme Court, but to no avail. Ready? Kennedy was sunnier about it all. As soon as the school district says, hey, come back, I am there. First flight, he said. So the school district has been flummoxed about what's happened since. They complied by offering to reinstate him, they say, although they actually say he actually never was dismissed. They were stayed from dismissing him, and they obeyed that court order too. So now they offered to reinstate him, and guess what? The football season is in full swing, but Kennedy is nowhere to be found. He says nowhere near the sidelines. He's had the paperwork for his reinstatement since August 8th, and we haven't gotten so much as a phone call, says Karen Beavers, spokesperson for Bremerton Schools. Instead, as the Bremerton Knights were prepping for their season in August, Kennedy was up in Alaska, meeting with former Vice President Mike Pence, for some reason in Alaska, and evangelist Franklin Graham. On the eve of the first game, which the Knights won, Kennedy was in Milwaukee being presented with an engraved .22 caliber rifle at an American Legion convention. Very important for the coach, right? The weekend of the second game, which the Knights also won, Kennedy appeared with former President Donald Trump at the Trump National Golf Club in New Jersey. He saw Trump get a religious award from a group called the American Cornerstone Institute. Coming up this month, Kennedy's scheduled to give a talk as part of a lectureship series at a Christian university in Arkansas. Place a PR/publicity request, invites his personal website, where he's known as Coach Joe. It's an increasingly surreal situation for the Bremerton schools. They were ordered to, quote, reinstate Coach Kennedy to a football coaching position, unquote, according to court documents. But the now famous coach is out on the conservative celebrity circuit, continuing to tell a story about, quote, the prayer that got me fired, even though Bremerton never actually fired him. Sort of a false witness thing, but, religious people don't care much about that. In 2015, he was put on paid leave near the end of the season after holding a series of prayer sessions on the field with students and state legislators. He still got paid for his full assistant coach contract, about $5,000. High school assistants often work on yearly deals, and Kennedy, at odds with the head coach and aggrieved by what had happened, never reapplied to work the 2016 season. He was not terminated, Bavers says. The head coach at the time had moved on, as did much of the coaching staff. This did not stop Kennedy's lawyers from telling the Supreme Court repeatedly that he was fired. The record is clear that Coach Kennedy was fired for that midfield prayer. Lawyer Paul Clement, and he's supposed to be an upstanding, straight shooter kind of guy. Paul Clement told the 9 justices in the first 15 seconds of the oral arguments of the case in April, the words fired or fire or firing were used 16 times in the hour-and-a-half session. It wasn't true, though. The district's lawyers tried to correct the record to no avail. You can't sue them for failing to rehire you if you didn't apply. One lawyer, Mercer Island's Michael Tierney, argued during the lower court session. The district didn't get an application from him. They had 4 positions to fill, and they filled them with people who had applied. It didn't fail to rehire him. The Supreme Court simply ignored this inconvenient fact, along with a host of others. At one point during oral arguments, as a different school district attorney was saying the narrative that had been spun didn't fit with the facts, that the coach's prayers were neither silent nor solitary, nor was he fired, Justice Samuel Alito interrupted him, saying, "I know that you want to make this very complicated." Alito also persisted in asking about the coach being fired. 6 times he said it, to the point that the lawyer finally corrected him, which is a touchy thing to do with Supreme Court justices. It's not a question of firing, and in fact, he was put on paid leave, the lawyer pleaded, fruitlessly, to Alito, but I mean, that was kind of the weakest possible approach to it. We didn't fire him, period. And then every year we ask all the coaches to reapply. He never even applied for the job, Your Honors. Why not even put it that way? In the end, it was all too complicated. The effect of the court's order is that Bremerton has to reinstate someone who didn't apply for the job then and doesn't appear eager for it now. It's as if the justices wanted to script an ending for a Christian redemption movie, but real life isn't cooperating. What's left of the case has been sent back to federal court in Seattle. A judge there is overseeing the rehiring issue and also how much in attorney's fees the Bremerton schools will have to pay Kennedy's lawyers. That judge has given them 60 days to submit more information on both. By then, the football season will be ending, so maybe next year? It's one of many things that have been odd and awkward about this situation, Bavers said. But when you're directed by the U.S. Supreme Court to do something, you do it. Unlike Hannity and the others saying, no, they'll definitely defy the Supreme Court. No, not likely. This past week, the Supreme Court justices were hand-wringing in public about why so many people seem to dislike them. The way Chief Justice John Roberts phrased it is that the public is questioning the legitimacy of the court. He said people shouldn't base their views on whether the court's decisions are popular. Well, that's fair enough. The rule of law isn't supposed to bend with the winds, but Justice Elena Kagan got much closer to the mark. The judges undermine their legitimacy when they don't act so much like courts, she pointedly said this past week, and when they don't do things that are recognizably law, and when they instead stray into places where it looks like they're an extension of the political process or where they're imposing their own personal preferences. And the piece closes, Your Honors, I submit for the record the Coach Kennedy case, Exhibit A. Good point. And it's a great illustration of just how absurd things have gotten. You're ordered to reinstate the guy, and now the situation is he's in a no-show job. The Supreme Court of the United States, Samuel Alito, was interrupting all the lawyers trying to tell him what was actually going on, saying, no, I understand this situation better than you do. I'm a Supreme Court justice. So just be quiet and do what I say. You must reinstate him. Well, he was never lost his job. The problem now is you're setting him up for a no-show job. We have to pay him to coach a football team. He's got no interest in coaching. He's out making a buck on the conservative lecture circuit. He hasn't showed up for a game yet, and he never even reapplied for the job. But we have to pay him for all this time that he hasn't been coaching. That can't be a conservative value, can it? Well, of course it can. When you're paying one of our guys, it absolutely is a conservative value. I thought that was fairly amazing development. Haven't heard much about it, but, you know, it's only going to be, for the moment, I think, a local interest story. And for the very local part of it, the poor people in Bremerton paying all their taxes to run their schools now have to be paying a no-show football coach. You shouldn't be paying the football coach in the first place anyway. They should be volunteers. They love football. Let them come and coach the football if they want to do it. But nope, you pay them. All right, all you have to do is apply for the job. You won't do it? Oh, okay. Well, all you have to do is show up, I guess, because the Supreme Court says you don't even have to apply. We have to pay you anyway. Oh, you think that, oh, well, you're right. The Supreme Court says we have to pay you whether you show up or not. So why not go make money on the lecture circuit and force us to pay you anyway because of how much you love football and just want to look out for the welfare of these kids and just love praying with them. It's something you can't stop yourself from doing unless, of course, someone else pays you to go pray with them because, of course, that's the way legitimate prayer always works. Okay. Well, anyway, that's all we have time for today. There's plenty more, of course, that we have yet to catch up on. Tomorrow we'll be doing that catching up, hopefully, with Joan McCarter. So that will be fun. There's lots happening, lots more crazy stories, and, of course, more will be generated between now and then. But why wait all the way until tomorrow when you can instead, or in addition, tune in for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next right here on Netroots Radio as Justice Putnam brings you through his collection of his view of what happened over the weekend. And, well, plenty happening, this time including actual Russian angles after all. I'll tell you about that.
NetrootsRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
I guess there's some emerging information here that says that Russian trolls were working overtime to disrupt the 2017 Women's March against Trump. Also news that Republicans in key battleground races refuse to say whether they will accept the midterm election results, whereas Democratic candidates, of course, say they would. What do you know? Stay tuned.